stared at his bank account balance with a mixture of disbelief and panic. 3 months of unemployment had drained his savings faster than he'd expected, and the rejection letter from Galactic Mining Consortium still sat crumpled in his trash can. The space stations needed workers, but apparently not ones with his particular set of skills in xenobiology and cultural integration. His cramped apartment on Luna Station hummed with the constant background noise of life support systems. Outside his small porthole, Earth hung like a blue marble against the black void, a reminder of the home he couldn't afford to visit anymore. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd studied alien cultures for years, only to find himself jobless when the very aliens he'd studied became humanity's business partners. The message notification chimed on his personal terminal, interrupting his brooding. Glanced at the sender, Trade Network. His heart skipped a beat. He'd applied for dozens of positions with various alien trading companies, hoping his academic background would finally pay off. "Greetings, human," the message began in perfectly translated Standard Galactic. "Your application for cultural consultant position has been reviewed. While position is currently filled, we have alternative opportunity that may interest you. Payment substantial. Please respond if interested in details." Read the message 3 times. Alternative opportunity could mean anything in alien business culture, but substantial payment was exactly what his bank account needed to hear. He typed back quickly, trying not to sound too desperate despite the growling of his empty stomach. Within hours, he received a response with coordinates to a meeting location in the commercial district of Luna Station. The sender identified himself as Al, a trade representative, had studied the extensively during his graduate work. They were a proud, honor-bound species with complex social hierarchies and an economy built on intricate trade agreements. The meeting location turned out to be an upscale restaurant that catered to cross-species dining. Arrived 15 minutes early, wearing his only clean suit and trying to project confidence he didn't feel. The D, a pleasant with features like a cross between a dolphin and a cat, directed him to a private booth where a massive figure waited. Al stood nearly 8 feet tall, with the characteristic blue skin and ridge-lined skull of his species. His clothing marked him as wealthy even by standards, all flowing fabrics and intricate metalwork. When he spoke, his voice carried the harmonic undertones that made speech so distinctive. "Human," Al rumbled, gesturing for to sit. "Your academic records show extensive study of our culture. This is unexpected for your species." Settled into the booth, grateful that the furniture was designed for multiple species. "I've always been fascinated by society. The integration of honor codes with practical commerce, the way your family structures support both individual achievement and collective success." Something that might have been approval flickered across Al's features. "Indeed. This brings us to why I requested this meeting. I have a business proposition that requires someone with your particular knowledge." A server approached, offering menus in multiple languages and chemical compositions. Ordered something safe and waited for Al to continue. "You understand our morning customs, yes?" Al asked, his tone becoming more formal. Nodded carefully. "The period of grief commerce, where the family of the deceased manages their business affairs while honoring their memory. It can last anywhere from 1 standard year to 5, depending on the circumstances of death and the family's wishes." "Precisely." Al leaned forward. "My cousin's widow finds herself in a difficult position. Her late husband was a successful trader, but his death was sudden. Asteroid mining accident. She has inherited his trading license and considerable assets, but law requires someone to formally witness and validate any major transactions during the mourning period." Frowned. "Usually that's done by family members or respected business partners, isn't it?" "Under normal circumstances, yes." Al's expression grew troubled. However, had complicated relationships with his family, and his business partners are attempting to manipulate the situation to their advantage. His widow needs an impartial witness, someone with no ties to commerce politics. The food arrived, giving time to process this information. The proposition was starting to sound more complex than a simple cultural consultation. "What exactly would my role be?" asked, sampling something that tasted remarkably like chicken. "You would serve as cultural mediator and transaction witness," Al explained. "Essentially, you would observe and validate her business decisions, ensuring they meet both galactic trade standards and mourning protocols. The position pays 50,000 credits plus expenses. Nearly choked on his food. 50,000 credits was more money than he'd ever seen at once. It would solve his immediate problems and leave him with enough to actually choose his next career move instead of taking whatever desperate opportunity presented itself. That's very generous, he managed. The amount reflects both the importance of the role and the anticipated duration, Al said. The mourning period could last up to 2 years, depending on how quickly completes the necessary ritual transactions. What kind of transactions are we talking about? Settling outstanding debts, fulfilling existing contracts, liquidating certain assets that cannot be maintained during mourning. Standard business closure activities, but with ceremonial significance. Al paused. There is one aspect of the arrangement that requires explanation. Set down his fork, sensing this was where the catch would be revealed. Mourning law requires the cultural mediator to be closely associated with the family. Traditionally, this would be someone related by blood or marriage. Since you are neither, and since the position must be filled within 10 days of death, a formal arrangement must be made. What kind of formal arrangement? Al's harmonic undertones shifted in what recognized as embarrassment. A temporary marriage contract, purely ceremonial and legal in nature, designed to provide you with the necessary social standing to serve as witness. It would be dissolved automatically at the conclusion of the mourning period. Stared at him. You want me to marry a woman I've never met for a business transaction? I understand this seems unusual from a human perspective, Al said quickly. But it is a common practice in commerce. Temporary marriages for business purposes are completely different from romantic or companionate marriages. Think of it as a very formal employment contract. And she's agreed to this. Is practical above all else. She needs someone she can trust and someone her late husband's rivals cannot influence or corrupt. Your academic background and lack of connections make you ideal. Al leaned back. She has reviewed your credentials and approved the arrangement. Felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. The money would solve everything, and the work itself sounded fascinating. He'd always wondered what it would be like to see culture from the inside instead of studying it from academic distance. I'd need to meet her first, he said finally. Of course, she is currently aboard her late husband's trading vessel, the Void's Edge, docked at Bay 94. I can arrange introduction immediately if you wish. Check the time. He had nothing else to do except worry about his bills and search fruitlessly for employment that didn't exist. All right, let's go meet my potential temporary wife. The walk through Luna Station's commercial sector gave time to second-guess his decision approximately 40 times. Bay 94 housed some of the larger trading vessels, and the Void's Edge turned out to be impressive even by those standards. The ship stretched nearly 300 meters, its hull marked with the flowing script of ownership declarations and trading licenses. Al led him through an airlock designed for multiple species and into corridors that spoke of serious money. The walls displayed art from a dozen worlds, and the lighting had been adjusted to accommodate various visual spectrums. This wasn't just a trading vessel, it was a statement of success. They found in what appeared to be a combination office and shrine. His first impression was that she was smaller than he'd expected. Most he'd met had been males like Al, and he'd unconsciously expected similar proportions. Stood perhaps 6 feet tall, with the same blue skin but more delicate features. Her clothing was clearly mourning attire, all silver and deep blue, with traditional Greek ornaments woven through her hair. She looked up as they entered and was struck by her eyes. Eyes were larger than human ones, with pupils that could expand dramatically in low light. Hers held a sharpness that spoke of intelligence and pain kept carefully under control. Al said informal, "May I present Human, the cultural mediator candidate?" She studied for a long moment before responding in accented but fluent standard. Your academic work on pre-contact trading customs was quite thorough. I read your thesis on ceremonial debt resolution. Blinked in surprise. You've read my thesis. I read everything I could find about you before agreeing to this arrangement. She gestured for them to sit in chairs arranged around a low table. I need to know that you understand what you would be agreeing to. Al explained the basic situation, said carefully. Temporary marriage for legal purposes, cultural mediation during the mourning period. The legal aspects are simple, said. The cultural aspects are more complex. As my temporary husband, you would be expected to understand and respect customs, even when they conflict with human sensibilities. Can you do that? Considered this. His academic training had taught him to observe without judgment, but living within a culture was different from studying it. I can try, but I'd need you to guide me when I'm uncertain. Something that might have been approval flickered in her large eyes. Honesty is more useful than confidence in this situation. She stood and moved to a wall display showing what appeared to be shipping manifests and star charts. Let me show you what we're dealing with. The scale of business became clear as she walked through the various holdings. Trading routes that spanned 3 sectors, partnerships with manufacturers on a dozen worlds, and assets worth millions of credits. But she also showed him the problems. Contracts with deadlines during the mourning period, business partners pushing for immediate decisions, and creditors who saw a widow as an opportunity for advantageous renegotiation. The mourning period isn't just about grief, she explained. It's about ensuring that major life changes are made thoughtfully without the pressure of immediate emotional response. But in commerce, delays cost money, and my late husband's partners are not patient people. Found himself genuinely interested in the challenge. This was applied studies on a scale he'd never imagined. What's the most urgent issue? The station contract, she said without hesitation. Agreed to deliver refined metals for their expansion project. The deadline is in 6 weeks, but the refinery partnership requires renegotiation since his death. His partners want to sell the contract to a competitor rather than honor it. Why is that a problem? Because honoring the contract was one of his final requests. He considered it a matter of personal honor. She touched one of the ornaments in her hair, a gesture recognized as invoking memory. In culture, a person's final business wishes carry the same weight as their personal ones. I cannot simply abandon the contract without dishonoring his memory. Was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. This wasn't just about managing assets. It was about navigating competing cultural obligations while maintaining a massive business operation. If I agreed to this arrangement, he said slowly, what would you expect from me day to day? Witness and validate my decisions according to both galactic trade standards and custom. Provide cultural insight when dealing with non-partners. Serve as neutral mediator when conflicts arise. She paused. And perhaps most importantly, learn enough about the business to ask intelligent questions. I need someone who can challenge my reasoning, not simply approve my choices. Al had been silent during this exchange, but now he spoke up. The marriage ceremony would take place tomorrow if you agree. Law requires the arrangement to be formalized before the 10th day after death. Looked between them, tomorrow. The ceremony is brief and purely functional, assured him. Think of it as signing a very elaborate contract. And living arrangements. You would have quarters aboard the Void's Edge. The ship serves as both home and office during the mourning period. She gestured around the luxurious space. You would have privacy and independence, but proximity for business purposes. Took a deep breath. Every rational part of his mind told him this was insane. Marry a stranger for a business arrangement. Move aboard an alien trading vessel. Get involved in commercial disputes worth more money than he could imagine. But the alternative was slowly starving on Luna Station while his savings ran out and his career prospects dwindled. And if he was honest with himself, this was exactly the kind of challenge he'd dreamed about during years of theoretical study. 50,000 credits, he confirmed, plus room and board and bonuses based on successful resolution of major contracts, added. And you're sure this is legal under both galactic and law? Completely legal, Al assured him. I have already filed the preliminary paperwork. Stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the vast commercial bay with its dozens of ships from across known space. Somewhere out there, people were making fortunes and losing them, building trade empires and watching them fall. He'd spent his entire adult life studying these cultures from the outside. Maybe it was time to step inside. All right, he said, turning back to face them. Let's get married. The marriage ceremony took place in the ship's formal reception hall, a space hadn't seen during his initial tour. The room could have hosted 50 people comfortably, with its soaring ceiling decorated in traditional geometric patterns and walls that displayed slowly shifting star maps. Instead, only 4 people attended. Al, and an official named who served as the legal officiant. Wore his one good suit again, feeling underdressed compared to the flowing ceremonial robes they had donned for the occasion. Had explained that the ceremony would be brief and purely functional, but seeing the formal setting made him realize this carried more weight in culture than she'd initially indicated. The words are traditional, explained in his resonant baritone, but the context is clearly business alliance rather than romantic union. This distinction is important in our law. The actual ceremony consisted of exchanging formal declarations of mutual responsibility and witness obligations, followed by the signing of documents that couldn't read but trusted were legitimate. The whole process took less than 20 minutes, but something about the solemnity of the words and the weight of tradition made it feel more significant than had expected. By the authority vested in me by the Trade Council and Galactic Commerce Commission, intoned, I declare this business alliance marriage valid for the duration of the mourning period. And just like that, was married to an alien woman for money. The strangest part was how normal everything felt afterward. Showed him to his quarters, a suite larger than his apartment on Luna Station with a private workspace and bathroom designed for human physiology. She'd had the environmental systems adjusted for human comfort levels, and the food replicator had been programmed with Earth cuisine databases. I'll let you settle in, she said, standing in the doorway of his new home. We'll begin work tomorrow morning at 0800 ship's time. I hope you're prepared for a steep learning curve. Spent his first night aboard the Void's Edge alternating between excitement and panic. Through his viewport, he could see Luna Station's familiar bulk, but it already felt like something from his past rather than his present. He'd committed to at least a year of this arrangement, possibly two. By the time he returned to normal human society, he'd either be financially secure and professionally accomplished, or he'd be completely out of his depth and ruined. Sleep came eventually, aided by the ship's perfectly controlled environment and the absence of Luna Station's constant background stress. He woke to the gentle chime of the ship's morning cycle and the realization that he had no idea what cultural mediator and transaction witness actually meant on a day-to-day basis. Answered that question quickly. Found her in the same office where they'd met, but now the displays showed real-time shipping data, commodity prices, and communication logs from across the galaxy. She'd clearly been working for hours. Good morning, husband, she said with what might have been gentle mockery. Are you ready to learn how to run a multi-system trading operation? The education began immediately. Walked through's business empire, explaining not just what the various holdings were, but how they interconnected. The station metals contract wasn't just a simple delivery. It was part of a complex web of relationships that included mining rights, refinery partnerships, shipping agreements, and political considerations across 3 different planetary governments. Human traders think in terms of individual transactions, explained, manipulating the holographic display to show trade route connections. Think in terms of ongoing relationships. Every deal affects every other deal. This is why the mourning period is so important. Rush a decision, and you can destroy relationships that took decades to build. Found himself fascinated despite the overwhelming complexity. But surely some decisions can't wait 2 years. Which is why we have cultural mediators, she said with a slight smile. Your job is to help me identify which decisions truly require immediate action and which only seem urgent because of external pressure. The first test came within hours. A priority communication arrived from Prime, marked with symbols that was learning indicated extreme urgency. Opened it in the main display, and even with his limited, could tell the sender was agitated. What's wrong? He asked. Industries wants to renegotiate the lithium extraction rights that negotiated last year. Harmonic undertones carried stress. They're claiming that his death voids the exclusivity clause. Studied the contract terms on the display. His knowledge of galactic trade law was theoretical rather than practical, but something about the timing seemed suspicious. When was this contract signed? 11 months ago. And when does the exclusivity clause actually expire? Manipulated the display, highlighting relevant sections. Not for another 4 years. So they're trying to use your mourning period to escape a contract they probably regret signing, concluded. That doesn't sound like something that requires immediate renegotiation. No, but they're threatening to cease all current shipments if we don't respond within 72 hours. This was exactly the kind of situation had warned him about. external pressure creating artificial urgency. Found himself thinking through the problem from multiple angles, considering not just the immediate legal issues but the broader relationship implications. What would have done, he asked, was quiet for a long moment. He would have reminded them that honor in business relationships extends both ways, that attempting to take advantage of a widow's grief brings dishonor on their entire company. And if that didn't work, he would have demonstrated the cost of breaking faith with traders. Something dangerous flickered in her large eyes. Industries depends on shipping networks for 60% of their off-world trade. Was beginning to understand the power dynamics involved. So this isn't really about the lithium contract. It's about whether they can intimidate you into making other concessions. Precisely, turned to face him fully. This is your first official decision as cultural mediator. How do we respond? The weight of responsibility settled on shoulders. His decision would affect not just this contract, but's position in future negotiations. Too aggressive, and he'd escalate a situation that could be resolved diplomatically. Too passive, and he'd mark her as an easy target for other attempts at exploitation. We respond according to business custom, he said finally. Formal, polite, and absolutely inflexible. We remind them that the contract is valid and binding, express confidence in their honor as business partners, and suggest that any perceived ambiguities can be resolved through proper arbitration channels rather than threats. Studied his face for several seconds, and if they carry out their threat to cease shipments, then we demonstrate that breaking contracts with traders has consequences, but we do it quietly and professionally, not as retaliation. Something that might have been approval appeared in her expression. Draft the response. I'll review it before transmission. Spent the next 2 hours crafting what he hoped was appropriately formal business correspondence. The language had to convey strength without aggression, confidence without arrogance. He found himself drawing on every linguistics and cultural studies course he'd ever taken, trying to capture nuances that didn't exist in human business communication. Made several corrections to his draft, mostly adjustments to honorific structures and relationship acknowledgments that had missed, but the core approach met her approval. You understand the principle correctly, she said as they transmitted the response. Now we wait to see if Industries is willing to test patience. The response came 18 hours later. Industries would honor the existing contract and looked forward to continuing their beneficial relationship with the trading enterprise. No mention of their previous threats or demands. Well done, said, and felt a surprising surge of pride at the simple praise. But if he thought that resolution would provide breathing room, he was mistaken. The next challenge arrived that same afternoon in the form of a passenger request from Altair Station. The request itself was routine enough, but the passenger was anything but. Ambassador Aura, said, reading the manifest, diplomatic representative from the Terran Colonial Authority. Frowned, human authority. Why would they contact a trader? Because they need discreet transportation for sensitive negotiations and built a reputation for absolute reliability in such matters. Highlighted portions of the request. Aura needs passage to the system for preliminary discussions about the new mining regulations. The same system where we have the metals delivery contract. The very same, leaned back in her chair. This is either remarkable coincidence or remarkable opportunity. Aura's negotiations could directly affect whether we can fulfill's final contract. Studied the passenger request more carefully. The timing was definitely suspicious, but not necessarily in a bad way. Do we normally take passengers? Occasionally, when the route aligns with our schedule and the passenger's credentials are acceptable. She gestured to another display showing Aura's diplomatic record. The ambassador's credentials are certainly acceptable. But taking her passage to immediately after asserting our position with Industries sends a message about our connections and influence. It could strengthen our negotiating position, or it could be seen as overreaching. Found himself thinking through the implications again. This was becoming a pattern he actually enjoyed. What if we're overthinking this? Maybe Aura genuinely needs transportation, and maybe she can provide insight into the regulatory situation that would help us plan our approach to the delivery. You're suggesting we treat this as a straightforward business transaction rather than a political maneuver. I'm suggesting we gather more information before making assumptions. called up Ara's request again. Look at the timeline. She needs to be in 3 weeks. Our delivery deadline is 6 weeks out. If the regulatory negotiations go badly, we need to know sooner rather than later. Considered this. And having the negotiations happen during her passage aboard our ship would give us excellent intelligence about potential complications. Plus, from a pure business standpoint, passenger fees for diplomatic transport are quite lucrative. Now you're thinking like a trader, smiled, the first genuinely warm expression had seen from her. Very well, we accept Ambassador Ara's request. The next few days fell into a rhythm that found surprisingly comfortable. Mornings were spent reviewing overnight communications and market reports. Afternoons focused on long-term planning and contract analysis. Evenings, when the ship operated on night cycle, taught the finer points of business culture while they shared meals in the ship's elegant dining area. You're adapting more quickly than I expected, she said one evening over what the food replicator assured him was a reasonable approximation of Earth chicken and vegetables. It helps that the basic principles make sense, replied. Build relationships, honor commitments, think long-term. Those aren't alien concepts. No, but the implementation details are quite different from human approaches, gestured with what might have been amusement. You still think too much about immediate problems and not enough about systemic implications. Give me an example. The situation. You focused on the specific contract dispute and how to resolve it. But you didn't consider how our response would affect other partners who might be watching for signs of weakness. Thought about this. You're saying the response wasn't just about lithium rights, but about establishing precedent for how the business operates during the mourning period. Exactly. Every major decision we make becomes a data point for our partners and competitors. They're all trying to determine whether Trading Network will maintain its strength and reliability, or whether his death created exploitable vulnerabilities. The scope of what they were really doing began to crystallize for. This wasn't just about managing existing contracts and relationships. They were essentially proving that the trading network could survive and thrive despite the loss of its founder. Every successful negotiation, every honored commitment, every maintained relationship was a vote of confidence in the enterprise's future. So when the mourning period ends, said slowly, you're not just inheriting a business. You're inheriting a reputation that we've either strengthened or damaged. Now you understand why temporary marriages for business purposes exist in law, said with satisfaction. The cultural mediator isn't just a witness. You're a partner in building something that will last beyond the immediate crisis. Ambassador Ara arrived the next morning and got his first look at a high-level human diplomat operating in alien spaces. She was perhaps 50 years old, with the kind of understated presence that suggested extensive experience in delicate situations. Her luggage was minimal, but her credentials were impressive enough to make feel slightly inadequate about his own qualifications. Ms. Ara said with appropriate formal courtesy, "Thank you for accommodating my schedule. The negotiations are rather time-sensitive." "Ambassador," replied with equally correct formality. "May I present my cultural mediator? He will be serving as liaison for human-specific concerns during your passage." Ara studied with sharp eyes. Cultural mediator, that's an interesting position for someone so young. Felt heat rise in his cheeks, but managed to keep his voice level. "I specialize in human-alien business relationships, Ambassador, particularly the intersection of legal obligations and cultural practices." "I see," Ara's tone suggested she saw more than was entirely comfortable with. "And you're married to Ms." "A temporary business arrangement," interjected smoothly, "designed to provide proper legal standing during the mourning period for my late husband." "Ah," Ara's expression shifted to something more understanding. "A practical solution to complex legal requirements. I've encountered similar arrangements in other sectors." As they settled, Ara into her guest quarters, found himself curious about her mission at. The new mining regulations she was negotiating could have significant implications for their metals delivery contract, but he couldn't simply ask a Terran diplomat about classified negotiations. Fortunately, Ara turned out to be quite willing to discuss the general parameters of her mission over dinner that evening. The conversation took place in the ship's formal dining room, with serving as gracious host and trying to balance curiosity with professional discretion. The expansion project represents a significant test of human-alien cooperation. Ara explained between courses of what the chef had prepared as fusion cuisine suitable for multiple species. 3 different planetary governments, 4 major mining consortiums, and 2 separate trade authorities all have to coordinate their efforts. Sounds challenging, said, which was diplomatic code for sounds like a nightmare. The technical aspects are actually quite straightforward, Ara continued. The political aspects, however, require considerable finesse. Each party wants to ensure their interests are protected while contributing to the collective success. Leaned forward with polite interest. And how do the new regulations affect existing contracts? That's one of the key issues we're addressing. Existing contracts will be honored, but the implementation timeline may require adjustment. Ara's careful phrasing suggested this was a significant understatement. Felt a chill of concern. What kind of adjustment? Delivery deadlines may need to be extended to accommodate new safety and quality inspections. Environmental impact assessments will be more thorough. Worker protection standards will be enhanced across all participating organizations. All of which sounded reasonable and responsible, but could already see the implications for their metals contract. Delays, additional inspections, new regulatory compliance requirements. His final contract was going to be much more complicated than anyone had anticipated. After Ara retired for the evening and remained in the dining room, discussing what they'd learned. 6 weeks is not going to be enough time, said flatly. Nodded grimly. Not if the new regulations require additional processing and inspection steps that weren't part of the original contract. Which means we need to renegotiate the timeline without appearing to use regulatory changes as an excuse for poor planning. Can we do that while honoring its intent to fulfill the contract? Was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently adjusting the memorial ornaments in her hair. Valued reliability above profit. He would want the contract fulfilled correctly rather than quickly. So we contact Station and explain the situation. We contact Station and demonstrate that trading network maintains his standards of excellence even under difficult circumstances. Stood and moved to the viewport, looking out at the stars. But first, we need to understand exactly what the new regulations will require. Joined her at the viewport. The stars looked the same as they always had, but somehow the space between them seemed full of new challenges and opportunities. Think Ara would be willing to share more specific information. I think Ambassador Ara is an experienced diplomat who understands that mutual benefit creates stronger agreements than one-sided advantage, replied thoughtfully. The question is whether we can offer her something she needs in exchange for the information we need. Such as... Smiled and was beginning to recognize that particular expression as a sign that she was forming a plan. Such as insight into how trading networks might support human colonial expansion in ways that benefit everyone involved. And with that comment, realized that their temporary marriage was about to become considerably more complex than either of them had originally anticipated. The opportunity to approach Ambassador Ara came sooner than expected. Found her the next morning in the ship's observation lounge, nursing what appeared to be genuine Earth coffee while watching the stars wheel past. The Void's edge was currently in hyperspace transit to the system, and the view through the reinforced showed the strange, shifting colors that marked travel between dimensional layers. "Good morning, Ambassador," said, settling into a chair across from her. "I hope you're finding your accommodations comfortable." "Quite comfortable, thank you." Ara studied him over her coffee cup. "Though I admit I'm curious about your background, mister. It's unusual to find a human serving in such a specialized role with a trading house." Had been expecting this question. "I studied relations at Luna University, specialized in the intersection of alien cultural practices and galactic trade law." "Academic background, then, no practical experience." "This is my first practical application," admitted. "Though I'm discovering that academic knowledge provides a solid foundation for understanding the principles involved." Ara smiled slightly. "Honesty is refreshing. Most people in your position would claim extensive experience they don't possess." Has made it clear that honesty is more valuable than false confidence in this situation. She sounds like a wise woman. Ara set down her coffee and leaned back. "Tell me, what's your assessment of the current trade relationship between the Terran Colonial Authority and trading networks?" The question felt like a test, but wasn't sure what the right answer might be. He decided to stick with his approach of honest analysis. From what I've observed, there's significant potential for mutual benefit that isn't being fully realized, he said carefully. Humans have industrial capacity and raw materials that traders could help distribute more efficiently, have established trade routes and relationship networks that could support human colonial expansion. But human traders tend to think in quarterly profit reports while plan in decades. Human colonists want rapid infrastructure development while trading practices emphasize sustainable long-term relationships. The fundamental approaches aren't incompatible, but they require careful coordination. Aura nodded approvingly. That's a remarkably astute assessment for someone with no practical experience. Felt a flush of pride at the compliment. What's your perspective as someone actually involved in the negotiations? That most of the barriers to better cooperation are based on misunderstanding rather than genuine conflicts of interest. Ara gestured toward the viewports. Take the project. Human engineers want to move quickly and efficiently. Partners want to ensure that rapid development doesn't damage long-term relationships with local governments and environmental groups. Both sides want the project to succeed, but they define success differently. How so? Humans measure success by whether the project completes on time and within budget. Measure success by whether the project enhances their reputation for reliability and strengthens their network of partnerships. Thought about this in terms of his own situation with, those aren't mutually exclusive goals. Exactly, which is why I believe the new regulations will ultimately benefit everyone involved, despite the short-term complications they create. This seemed like an opening. Can you give me a sense of what those complications might involve? I ask because we have a delivery contract to station that may be affected. Ara studied him for a moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. What kind of delivery? Refined metals for the expansion project, contracted by before his death. Ah, Ara's expression shifted to sympathy. Mention that you're helping her honor her late husband's commitments. That's admirable. It's also proving more complex than we originally anticipated. The new regulations will require all materials delivered to station to meet enhanced purity standards, Ara said after a moment. Additionally, there will be new documentation requirements to ensure traceability back to original mining sources. Felt his heart sink. How much additional processing time are we talking about? For materials that are already refined, perhaps 2 to 3 weeks for additional purification and certification. 3 weeks beyond their 6-week deadline would put them 9 weeks out from their original commitment. That wasn't just a delay, it was a fundamental failure to meet the contract terms. Is there any flexibility in the timeline? Asked. For contracts signed before the regulatory announcement? Yes, there's a grace period for good faith compliance efforts. Ara leaned forward. The key phrase is good faith. If station believes you're genuinely working to meet the new standards rather than simply making excuses for poor planning, they're authorized to grant reasonable extensions. Felt a glimmer of hope. What would constitute good faith compliance? Demonstrating that you've initiated the additional processing steps, providing regular progress updates, and showing that you're working with certified facilities that meet the new standards. All of which would be easier if we understood the specific requirements before we reached. Ara smiled, which brings us to the interesting possibility of mutual benefit. I'm authorized to provide preliminary regulatory information to qualified trading partners who are willing to serve as pilot programs for the new standards. What would that involve? Your delivery could serve as a test case for how the new regulations work with existing contracts. You'd receive detailed information about the requirements and expedited processing in exchange for documenting the experience and providing feedback about potential improvements. Tried to keep his excitement from showing. That sounds like exactly what we need. There would be additional requirements, Ara cautioned. Regular reporting, compliance with monitoring protocols, cooperation with inspectors. It's more work, not less. But it would allow us to honor the contract while meeting the new standards. It would provide a path toward honoring the contract, yes. Stood energy coursing through him. I need to discuss this with immediately. Of course, but Mr. Ara's tone stopped him at the lounge entrance. This kind of pilot program would establish a precedent for how Terran colonial authority works with trading networks. If it goes well, it could open doors for much larger opportunities. If it goes poorly, it could damage relationships for years to come. Finished. Precisely. Make sure you understand what you're agreeing to before you commit. Found in her office, reviewing mineral processing reports with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd been working on the same problem he'd just discovered a potential solution for. "We may have a way to honor contract," he said without preamble. Looked up from her displays. "I'm listening," explained Ara's pilot program proposal, trying to convey both the opportunities and the risks involved. As he spoke, he watched expression shift from cautious interest to careful calculation. "A pilot program would give us access to the detailed requirements," she said when he finished. "But it would also put us under intense scrutiny from both Terran authorities and our own trading partners." "Is that a problem?" "It depends on how well we perform. Success would enhance our reputation significantly. Failure would mark us as unreliable partners who do experimental arrangements." Settled into the chair across from her desk. "What would have done?" Was quiet for a long moment, her fingers once again touching the memorial ornaments in her hair. He would have seen it as an opportunity to demonstrate adaptability and reliability. He believed that challenges were chances to prove competence. "So we take the pilot program." "We take the pilot program if we're confident we can succeed, which means we need to understand exactly what success requires." The next several hours were spent in detailed discussions with Ara, examining every aspect of the proposed pilot program. The requirements were indeed complex. They would need to work with certified processing facilities that could document every step of the additional purification procedures. They would need to maintain detailed records of all materials and processes. They would need to coordinate with Terran inspectors and quality assurance teams. But the benefits were equally significant: expedited processing through regulatory channels, direct access to station expansion project managers, potential for follow-up contracts if the pilot program succeeded, and most importantly for a clear path toward honoring's final business commitment. "We'll need to modify our approach to the refinery partnership," said as they reviewed the processing requirements. "Industries won't be sufficient for the enhanced purity standards." "Do we have alternatives?" "Meridian Refining on Tau has the necessary certification. They're more expensive, but they specialize in exactly the kind of high purity processing the new regulations require." Pulled up Meridian's specifications on his personal terminal. "Would switching refineries affect our timeline?" "Actually, it might improve it. Meridian can begin processing immediately, while would need 2 weeks to retool their facilities for the new standards." "So changing partners actually helps us." "If we can negotiate acceptable terms. Meridian's prices are 30% higher than's, but they guarantee delivery within required specifications." Did quick calculations in his head. That cuts into profit margins, but it doesn't eliminate them entirely. And if the pilot program leads to additional contracts, the enhanced reputation would be worth considerably more than short-term profit losses. They spent the rest of the day crafting their response to Ara's proposal and their new approach to the metal's delivery contract. The pilot program acceptance required careful negotiation of monitoring protocols and reporting requirements. The refinery partnership switch required delicate communication with both industries and Meridian Refining. Found himself impressed with Sa's ability to manage multiple complex negotiations simultaneously. She could shift from formal diplomatic language with Ara to aggressive commercial bargaining with Meridian to carefully worded relationship preservation with, all while maintaining the appropriate cultural context for each conversation. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked during a brief break between calls. "Taught me," she said simply. He said that successful trading required understanding not just what people needed, but how they preferred to discuss what they needed. "He sounds like he was remarkable at this." Smiled, but it carried sadness alongside warmth. "He was, which is why honoring his final contract matters so much to me. It's not just about business reputation. It's about proving that what he built can survive without him." Felt a sudden understanding of what they were really doing. This wasn't just about completing a delivery or managing a business transition. It was about demonstrating that his approach to trade, his network of relationships, his reputation for reliability could continue beyond his personal presence. "We're not just honoring a contract," said slowly. "We're preserving a legacy." "Now you understand why the mourning period is so important in culture," said. "It's not just time to grieve. It's time to ensure that a person's achievements continue to benefit others after their death." The weight of responsibility settled on shoulders once again, but this time it felt different. Instead of intimidating, it felt meaningful. He wasn't just helping a stranger manage a business transition. He was helping preserve something valuable that would benefit people across multiple star systems for years to come. That evening, over dinner in the ship's dining room, they finalized their agreements with Aura and received confirmation from Meridian Refining that they could begin processing within 48 hours of receiving the raw materials. "So we're committed," said, raising his glass in a toast, "to the pilot program, to his final contract, and to proving that his trading network remains as reliable as ever. To unexpected partnerships," added, raising her own glass, "and to learning that business marriages can be more successful than anyone anticipates." Ara smiled and raised her glass as well, to the potential for human cooperation that benefits everyone involved. As they drank the toast, realized that somewhere in the past few days, his relationship with had shifted from strictly professional to something more complex. Not romantic, exactly, but deeper than simple business partnership. They were genuinely working together toward shared goals, supporting each other's decisions, building something that neither of them could have achieved alone. The irony wasn't lost on him that his fake marriage for business purposes was beginning to feel more like a real partnership than many actual relationships he'd observed. But before he could analyze that thought too deeply, the ship's communication system chimed with an urgent message indicator. Moved to answer it, and her expression quickly shifted from relaxed satisfaction to sharp concern. "What's wrong?" asked. "Priority message from station. There's been an accident at the expansion site." Aura set down her glass and moved to join them at the communication display. "What kind of accident?" Manipulated the controls to display the full message. "Structural collapse in the primary construction zone. No casualties, but significant damage to equipment and infrastructure." Felt a chill of apprehension. How does this affect the expansion timeline? "Unknown at this time," Aura said, reading through the incident report. "But if the damage is extensive, it could delay the entire project by months." "Which would make our delivery contract meaningless," said flatly. The three of them stared at the display in silence, watching as additional reports filled in details about the scope of the damage. The accident appeared to be the result of a design flaw in the new support structures, exacerbated by the fact that construction had proceeded faster than safety inspections. "This is exactly why the new regulations were necessary," Aura said finally. "Rapid construction without proper oversight creates exactly these kinds of problems." Studied the damage reports, looking for any indication of how long repairs might take. Could the pilot program help with the recovery effort? How asked. If the accident was caused by rushing construction without proper quality controls, then demonstrating our commitment to the new regulatory standards might position us as a reliable partner for the reconstruction effort. Aura nodded slowly. "The reconstruction will require materials that meet even higher standards than the original project. Proving that you can deliver high-quality materials reliably could make your trading network invaluable for the recovery." "But only if we can successfully complete the pilot program first," pointed out. Felt the familiar sensation of multiple complex challenges converging into a single critical moment. "So we have approximately 4 weeks to prove that we can meet enhanced regulatory standards while delivering materials that exceed the original contract specifications. To a destination that may not be ready to receive them when we arrive," Aura added. "For a project that may be completely redesigned based on lessons learned from the accident," concluded. The three of them looked at each other and realized that their pilot program had just transformed from a helpful test case into a potential make-or-break demonstration of their capabilities. "Well," he said finally, "at least it won't be boring." The next week passed in a blur of frantic coordination and careful planning. The Void's Edge arrived at Meridian Refining's facility at Tau 3 days ahead of schedule, thanks to some creative route optimization that had negotiated with the Navigation Guild. Found himself constantly amazed by the depth of her professional network and her ability to call in favors from contacts across multiple star systems. Meridian Refining turned out to be exactly what they needed. A state-of-the-art facility designed specifically for the kind of high-purity processing that the new regulations required. The facility manager, a pragmatic named Al, met them at the docking bay with enthusiasm that bordered on excitement. "A pilot program for the new Terran standards," Al said, his voice carrying the melodic harmonics characteristic of his species. "This is exactly the kind of challenge we built this facility to handle." Watched as Al guided them through the processing areas, explaining each stage of purification and certification. The technology was impressive, but what struck him most was the attention to detail and documentation. Every step of the process was monitored, recorded, and by multiple independent systems. "The key to meeting Terran regulatory standards," Al explained, "is proving not just that the final product meets specifications, but that every step of the process was controlled and documented according to approved protocols." "How long for complete processing of our materials?" asked. "Normally, 18 standard days from raw ore to certified refined metals. But for your pilot program, we've allocated additional quality assurance resources. 14 days, with complete documentation packages ready for Terran inspection." Felt a surge of relief. 14 days would put them exactly on schedule for their original delivery deadline, assuming no additional complications arose. Of course, additional complications were exactly what arose. The message from Station arrived on their third day at Tau. Station Administrator Al, no relation to, despite the similar name, requested an immediate conference with the pilot program participants to discuss modifications to the delivery requirements. The conference took place via hyperspace communication link, with and Ara representing their respective interests, while Al appeared as a hologram in the Void's Edge's communication center. Al turned out to be tall and graceful with the kind of multicolored skin patterns that indicated high social status in their culture. "The structural collapse has created opportunities to improve the expansion project design," Al explained without preamble. "However, it has also revealed that our original material specifications were insufficient for the loads we actually need to support." Felt his stomach drop. "What kind of modifications are we talking about?" "Enhanced tensile strength requirements, improved corrosion resistance, and better thermal conductivity. The good news is that these improvements align perfectly with the new regulatory standards you're piloting." "And the bad news?" asked. "The quantity requirements have increased by 40% to account for the structural modifications." Aura leaned forward in her chair. "Can the existing contracts accommodate that kind of increase?" "The contracts have force clauses that allow for modification due to unforeseen circumstances," Al said. "However, we need to know immediately whether your suppliers can meet the increased quantities within the same timeline." Looked at, who was already pulling up production specifications on her personal terminal. The calculations took several minutes, during which Al waited with the kind of patience that suggested this wasn't the first major logistical challenge they'd faced in recent weeks. "Meridian can increase production by 30% without extending the timeline," said finally. "The additional 10% would require either accepting a 1-week delay or sourcing supplemental materials from another facility." "What other facility could provide materials that meet the enhanced specifications?" Aura asked. "Industries, ironically," replied. "They've completed the retooling for new regulatory compliance faster than anticipated. They could provide the additional 10% within specifications, but they're still 3 weeks away from full certification." "Saw the problem immediately. So we could meet the quantity requirement, but we'd have mixed sourcing that might complicate the pilot program documentation." "Not necessarily," Al interjected. "The pilot program is designed to test real-world implementation challenges. Mixed sourcing from multiple certified facilities is exactly the kind of situation the regulations need to address." Aura nodded approvingly. "It would actually strengthen the pilot program if we can demonstrate that the new standards work effectively with multiple suppliers. But it would also introduce additional complexity and potential failure points," pointed out. Found himself thinking through the implications again. More complexity, more risk, but also more potential for demonstrating the comprehensive capabilities of trading network. What would have done, he asked quietly. Smiled and was beginning to recognize that particular expression as a sign that she'd already made her decision. He would have seen it as an opportunity to prove that his network could handle any challenge the galaxy might present. So we take on the increased requirements. And demonstrate that trading networks can adapt to any situation while maintaining absolute reliability. Al's hologram flickered slightly as data transmission paused across hyperspace distances. Excellent. We'll transmit the detailed specifications immediately. The enhanced timeline allows 3 weeks for delivery with bonus incentives for early completion. After the conference ended, found himself alone within her office while Ara returned to her quarters to report the developments to Terran colonial authority. "Are we insane?" asked bluntly. "Probably," replied cheerfully. "But we're committed now, and the potential rewards justify the risks." "What kind of rewards are we talking about?" Pulled up financial projections on the main display. Successful completion of the enhanced contract with early delivery bonuses would generate profits 40% above our original estimates. More importantly, it would establish our network as the preferred partner for future expansion phases. Studied the numbers, and if we fail, we lose approximately 60% of our initial investment. We damage our reputation with both Terran and authorities, and we dishonor memory. No pressure at all. The best opportunities always come with significant risks, said philosophically. The key is ensuring that you have the capabilities to manage those risks effectively. And do we? Stood and moved to the viewport, looking out at Meridian Refining's industrial complex. A month ago, I would have said no, but watching how you've approached each challenge we've faced, how you think through problems and relationships, how you've adapted to business culture. Yes, I believe we do. Felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Thank you. That means more to me than you probably realize. Your confidence has grown considerably since our first meeting, observed. You're thinking like a trader now, not like an academic studying traders. I had a good teacher. We've been teaching each other, she corrected. Your human perspective on problem solving has been invaluable. You see solutions that wouldn't occur to someone raised in business culture. The compliment pleased more than it probably should have. Somewhere over the past weeks, proving himself competent in his eyes had become important to him in ways that went beyond simple professional pride. But before he could analyze that thought too deeply, the communication system chimed with another urgent message. This one came from Industries. More complications? Asked. Hopefully not, said, opening the message. As she read, her expression shifted from concern to something that might have been amusement. What is it? Industries is formally apologizing for their misunderstanding regarding the lithium contract, and they're requesting partnership status for the pilot program. Blinked in surprise. They want to work with us instead of against us. Apparently, word about the pilot program has spread through trading networks faster than we anticipated. Realizes that being excluded from a successful Terran cooperation project could damage their reputation more than honoring the original lithium contract. So they're basically asking us to help them save face. They're offering mutually beneficial partnership that allows them to participate in the pilot program while fulfilling their obligations under existing contracts. Considered this development, is that good for us? It depends on whether we can trust them to maintain quality standards and delivery commitments. But yes, having as a cooperative partner would be significantly better than having them as a hostile competitor. What would partnership look like? Manipulated the display to show's proposal in detail. They provide the additional 10% of materials needed for, plus guaranteed priority processing for our lithium requirements. In exchange, they receive documentation access that allows them to implement the new regulatory standards across their entire operation. Basically, they get to learn the new standards through our pilot program, while contributing to our success and strengthening their own position for future contracts. It's actually quite elegant. Found himself admiring the complexity of the arrangement. So instead of fighting over market share, everyone benefits from improved capabilities. Welcome to advanced trading philosophy, said with satisfaction. Transform competitors into partners whenever possible. The next few days were spent finalizing partnership agreements with industries and coordinating production schedules between Meridian Refining and its facilities. Discovered that managing multiple complex partnerships simultaneously required a completely different set of skills than he'd anticipated. It's like conducting an orchestra, he said to Ara over breakfast. Everyone has to play their part perfectly, but they also have to coordinate with everyone else's timing. And if anyone misses their cue, the entire performance suffers, Ara agreed. But when it works properly, the result is more impressive than any individual performance could be. Is this typical for major trade projects? For the successful ones, yes. The failed projects are usually the ones where people try to maximize their individual advantage instead of optimizing collective success. Thought about this as he watched coordinate the morning's production reports from both Meridian and. Her approach was consistently focused on ensuring that everyone's needs were met rather than maximizing any single party's profit. She's remarkable at this, he said quietly. Yes, she is, Ara agreed, which raises an interesting question about your own plans. How so? Your temporary marriage contract expires at the end of the mourning period. What happens then? Felt a strange pang at the question. He'd been so focused on the immediate challenges that he hadn't really thought about what would happen when the pilot program was complete and his services as cultural mediator were no longer needed. I assume I return to whatever normal human life looks like after this experience. That seems like a waste of the partnership you've built. We have a partnership. Ara smiled. Mister, I've been observing diplomatic and business relationships for most of my career. What you and have developed goes well beyond a simple temporary business arrangement. Felt heat rise in his cheeks. It's a professional relationship. It's a successful partnership between two people who complement each other's capabilities and genuinely respect each other's contributions. Whether that's professional or personal is really a matter of how you choose to define it. Before could respond, approached their table with what appeared to be excellent news. Both production facilities are ahead of schedule, she announced. Meridian will complete their 70% in 12 days and will complete their 30% in 14 days. We could actually deliver early. How early? Ara asked. 4 days before the original deadline, 2 weeks before the extended timeline. Felt a surge of excitement. That would definitely qualify for early delivery bonuses. And more importantly, said, settling into the chair beside, it would demonstrate that the new regulatory standards can be implemented efficiently without sacrificing speed or quality. Which makes the pilot program a resounding success, Ara added. Looked between the two women and realized that they'd actually done it. Despite accidents, changing requirements, increased quantities, and multiple complex partnerships, they were going to deliver exactly what station needed, ahead of schedule and above specifications. Would be proud, he said quietly. His expression grew soft. Yes, he would, but I think he'd be most impressed by how well his trading network has adapted to include human perspectives and Terran cooperation. Speaking of adaptation, Ara said with a meaningful look, have you two given any thought to what happens after the mourning period ends? And looked at each other, and realized that they'd both been avoiding that particular question for exactly the same reasons. The business will continue, said carefully. The trading network, the partnerships, the reputation we've built. But the temporary marriage contract expires, Ara pointed out. Yes, said quietly, it does. Found himself thinking about returning to Luna Station, to his small apartment and his job search and his ordinary human life. After everything they'd accomplished together, after the challenges they'd faced and the successes they'd achieved, the prospect felt strangely empty. What if it didn't have to? He heard himself say. Both women looked at him in surprise. I mean, continued, feeling like he was jumping off another cliff, what if we extended the partnership beyond the mourning period? Stared at him. Are you suggesting we remain married? I'm suggesting we remain partners. The marriage contract is just paperwork. But what we've built together, the way we work together, the success we've achieved. Why would we end that just because a traditional timeline says we should? Ara smiled broadly. Now that's a diplomatic solution that benefits everyone involved. Was quiet for a long moment, studying face. You would want to continue this permanently. Thought about everything they'd accomplished in just a few weeks, everything they'd learned from each other, everything they could achieve together with more time and resources. I can't think of anything I'd rather do, he said honestly. Smiled, the first genuinely joyful expression had seen from her since they'd met. Then we'll need to renegotiate the contract terms. Permanent partnerships require much more complex arrangements than temporary ones. I'm looking forward to the negotiations, said, and realized that he absolutely meant it. The delivery to station went even better than they had dared hope. The Void's Edge arrived 3 days ahead of their accelerated schedule, carrying materials that exceeded every specification in the enhanced requirements. Station Administrator Al met them personally at the docking bay, accompanied by a full inspection team and what appeared to be several very senior officials from both Terran Colonial Authority and the Galactic Trade Commission. This is unprecedented, Al said as they reviewed the quality certifications. Dual-source materials that meet identical specifications, complete documentation trails, and early delivery despite increased quantity requirements. Stood beside as the inspection teamed their cargo, feeling a pride that went far beyond simple professional satisfaction. They had accomplished something genuinely impressive, something that would serve as a model for future cooperation between human and trading networks. The pilot program appears to be an unqualified success, announced director from the Galactic Trade Commission. The new regulatory framework clearly works effectively when implemented by competent professionals. Ara stepped forward to address the assembled officials. The success of this delivery demonstrates that enhanced standards and accelerated timelines are compatible goals when proper partnerships are established between experienced traders and regulatory authorities. Indeed, Al agreed. Which brings us to the question of future applications. Station's reconstruction will require deliveries on this scale every 6 weeks for the next 2 years. Would the trading network be interested in serving as primary materials supplier for the entire project? Felt's hand brush against his arm, a subtle signal that meant, let me handle the initial response. He was learning to read her professional cues with the kind of instinctive understanding that came from successful partnership. The network would be honored to serve as primary supplier, replied with formal courtesy. However, such an extensive commitment would require detailed negotiation of terms and coordination with our partner networks. Naturally, we would expect nothing less from traders of your caliber. Al gestured to an aide, who began distributing data tablets. These contain preliminary specifications for the full reconstruction project. Please review them at your convenience and let us know your initial assessment. As the formal ceremony concluded and cargo transfer operations began, found himself reflecting on how much had changed since his desperate meeting with Al at Luna Station. 6 weeks ago, he'd been an unemployed academic with dwindling savings and no prospects. Now he was a partner in a successful trading network with contracts worth millions of credits and opportunities spanning multiple star systems. But more importantly, he'd found something he was genuinely good at, something that felt meaningful in ways his academic work had never quite achieved. You're thinking very seriously about something, observed as they watched the cargo transfer operations from the station's observation deck. Just realizing how much my life has changed in the past few weeks. Changed for the better, I hope. Looked at her, taking in the satisfaction in her expression and the confidence in her posture. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but it no longer dominated her presence. She had successfully honored her husband's memory while building something new and valuable. Definitely for the better, he said. Though I have to admit, the permanent partnership negotiations are going to be more complex than I originally anticipated. Oh, gestured toward the data tablet containing reconstruction specifications. 2 years of regular deliveries, plus whatever other opportunities develop from our success here. We're not just talking about extending our current arrangement. We're talking about building something much larger. Moved to stand beside him at the observation deck's railing. Are you having second thoughts? The opposite, actually. I'm realizing that what we've built together has potential I never imagined when we started. Such as? called up the preliminary specifications on his tablet, highlighting sections that had caught his attention. Look at the scope of this reconstruction project. It's not just about replacing damaged infrastructure. They're completely reimagining how the station operates, incorporating new technologies, new approaches to resource management. And they're going to need cultural integration specialists to coordinate between all the different species and governmental authorities involved. They're going to need someone who understands both human efficiency requirements and relationship management. Studied the specifications with growing interest. You're suggesting we expand beyond materials supply into comprehensive project coordination. I'm suggesting we position ourselves as the go-to partnership for complex multi-species infrastructure projects. Use our success here as proof of concept for an entirely new approach to galactic commerce. The idea was ambitious enough to make slightly dizzy as he articulated it. But looking at what they'd accomplished with the pilot program, the scale of challenge they'd successfully managed, it didn't seem impossible. That would require significantly more resources than our current operation, said thoughtfully. It would also generate significantly more opportunities, and we already have the foundation. Proven partnerships with Meridian and successful cooperation with Terran authorities demonstrated ability to meet enhanced regulatory standards. Plus connections throughout,